When greed meets betrayal, only Agatha Marple can uncover the truth on the most luxurious train in the world. Dive into this suspenseful tale, packed with intrigue, deception, and justice. The whistle echoed sharply through the cool morning air, cutting through the vibrant chatter of passengers on the platform. The Orient line train gleamed like a polished emerald beneath the rising sun, its brass fixtures catching glints of light. Istanbul Station, with its chaotic charm and rich aroma of spices, bustled with life, a mosaic of cultures converging at the threshold of an unforgettable journey. Amid the crowd, a diminutive woman with sharp eyes and a quiet demeanor observed the scene with practiced interest. Agatha Marple, modestly dressed in a finely tailored traveling suit, exuded an air of gentle authority. Clutching a small leather valise, she paused to savor the spectacle before her. To the casual observer, she might have seemed like an unassuming historian, but beneath that exterior lay a mind as sharp as any blade. Stepping aboard the opulent train, Agatha was greeted by a uniformed steward, who inclined his head respectfully. "Welcome aboard, madam. Your compartment awaits." The first-class carriage was a marvel of refinement. Narrow corridors lined with polished wood paneling shimmered under brass inlays. Plush carpets silenced footsteps, while the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of leather upholstery. Velvet drapes framed windows that promised sweeping views of the countryside. Settling into her compartment, Agatha allowed her gaze to wander as passengers filed past. A young woman with nervous energy clutched a book to her chest, as if it were a shield against unseen dangers. A stately older man, clearly a scholar by his frown and pocket watch obsession, muttered under his breath. Nearby, a glamorous couple bedecked in jewels exchanged whispered words in rapid French. A gathering of secrets. The whistle blew again, signaling the train's departure. As the engine roared to life, Istanbul faded into a blur of domes and bustling streets. Inside, however, the stage was set for intrigue, and Agatha Marple was ready to play her part. The dining car exuded opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over polished mahogany tables, adorned with fine china and silverware. Uniformed waiters moved gracefully between guests, their movements choreographed to perfection. The soft hum of conversation filled the air, punctuated by the clink of glassware. Agatha chose a seat near the center, her unobtrusive presence granting her an excellent vantage point. Across the room, Dr. Peregrine Harrington, towering man with a booming voice and commanding presence, held court at a table surrounded by captivated listeners. His white mustache quivered as he regaled them with tales of ancient expeditions. "And there it was," Harrington declared dramatically, "buried beneath centuries of sand, a relic unlike any other. The craftsmanship alone suggests it predates recorded history." The audience murmured in appreciation, though not all faces were equally enraptured. Dr. Evelyn Montague, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp features and an unflinching gaze, tapped her fork against her plate in irritation. Beside her sat Sir Julian Blake, a stout man with a practiced joviality that barely concealed his calculating nature. "I suppose you've brought this wonder aboard with you, Dr. Harrington?" Sir Julian inquired, his tone light but edged with something darker. "It must be a sight to behold." Harrington's chest puffed with pride. "Indeed, Sir Julian, I would not dream of leaving such a treasure unattended. But I must warn you all," he added ominously, "this artifact comes with a history of misfortune. Some might even call it cursed." A ripple of nervous laughter traveled through the dining car. Madame Dubois, a striking woman adorned with an array of glittering jewels, leaned forward with intrigue. "Cursed, you say? How deliciously ominous." Agatha noted the flicker of unease that crossed Montague's face. "Superstition," Montague said briskly. "Nothing more. Science deals in facts, not fairy tales." "And yet," Harrington countered, eyes gleaming, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper, "his history is riddled with curses, Doctor. Montaguist as it is riddled with greed, betrayal, and," his voice dropped to a hushed tone, "murder." A heavy silence descended over the room, the weight of Harrington's words settling like an unseen shadow. Agatha sipped her tea, her mind already piecing together the dynamics at play: professional rivalries, strained alliances, and whispers of a cursed artifact. The unraveling begins. As the train pressed on through the Turkish countryside, Agatha's keen eyes observed the subtle tensions rippling through the dining car. Montague's rigid posture, Sir Julian's calculating tilt of the head, Harrington's smug satisfaction. Each detail painted a portrait of hidden motives. Later that evening, a sudden commotion shattered the tranquility of the train. The sharp cry of a woman echoed through the corridors, followed by hurried footsteps. Passengers emerged from their compartments, faces pale with curiosity and dread. Agatha was already moving toward the source of the disturbance. The young woman with the nervous energy stood trembling outside a compartment door, her book forgotten on the floor. "What happened?" Agatha asked gently, her voice steady. "I heard something," the woman stammered, a terrible sound like someone struggling. The door to the compartment creaked open, revealing a scene of chaos: upturned furniture, shattered glass, and, most ominously, a dark stain spreading across the plush carpet. Dr. Harrington lay motionless, his once booming voice silenced forever. The game of deception. As the train hurtled through the night, Agatha Marple knew that the journey had taken a sinister turn. The luxury and opulence of the Orient line now masked a web of secrets and lies. With her sharp mind and unyielding determination, Agatha was prepared to uncover the truth no matter how dark it might be. The last stop on the Orient line promised revelations far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The rhythmic clatter of the Orient Express filled the dining car like a steady heartbeat, a sound that promised both adventure and intrigue. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a warm glow, their light reflecting off polished mahogany tables set with fine china and gleaming silverware. The delicate hum of conversation mingled with the occasional clink of cutlery, creating a symphony of refinement. At first glance, the passengers appeared perfectly at ease, dressed in their finest attire and exchanging pleasantries over exquisite courses. But to Agatha Marple, a seemingly quaint woman, with sharp eyes hidden behind a modest demeanor, appearances were never the whole story. Seated near the center of the car, Agatha's expression was one of mild interest. Her small frame, clad in a tailored traveling suit, blended seamlessly into the scene, yet her mind was anything but idle. Every glance, every fidget, every carefully chosen word was meticulously catalogued and analyzed. She hadn't boarded the Orient Express merely for the scenic journey. She was here to uncover truths. At the far end of the dining car, Dr. Perel Harrington commanded the attention of an enthralled audience. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a booming voice and a thick white mustache that quivered with every dramatic proclamation, Harrington was the picture of a man accustomed to admiration. "I assure you," Harrington declared, swirling the wine in his glass for emphasis, "this artifact is not only genuine but unparalleled in its significance. The craftsmanship, the detail, it could only have been the work of a civilization far older than we dare imagine." Madame Dubois, a striking woman with ruby-red lips and a penchant for expensive jewelry, tilted her head, her smile both gracious and sharp. "Indeed, Dr. Harrington, and yet I cannot help but wonder where exactly was this extraordinary find unearthed. It sounds almost too good to be true." A tense silence followed her words. Harrington's confident smile wavered but returned quickly, his chin lifting defiantly. "The site must remain undisclosed for now, Madame Dubois," he replied smoothly. "The academic world is rife with opportunists, as I'm sure you understand." "Of course," Dubois murmured, though her gaze remained unyielding. "And I imagine such an artifact would come with complications, questions of provenance, perhaps." Beside Harrington, Dr. Evelyn Montague, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp features and a steady gaze, shifted uncomfortably. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the stem of her water glass. Agatha noted the movement, filing it away with quiet precision. Sir Julian Blake, seated on Harrington's other side, leaned back in his chair with an air of practiced joviality. His round face was wreathed in smiles, but his eyes gleamed with something far more calculating. "A fascinating tale, Dr. Harrington," Sir Julian drawled. "But tell me, have you brought this wonder aboard with you? It must be a sight to behold. Harrington's chest puffed with pride. Indeed, Sir Julian, I would not dream of leaving such a treasure unattended. But I must warn you all, he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. This artifact comes with a history of misfortune. Some might even call it cursed. A ripple of nervous laughter traveled through the dining car. Madame Dubois leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with intrigue. Cursed, you say? How deliciously ominous. Agatha's sharp eyes caught the flicker of unease that crossed Montague's face. The scientist's lips thinned, and she tapped her fork against her plate with a controlled irritation. Superstition, Montague said briskly. Nothing more. Science deals in facts, not fairy tales. And yet, Harrington countered, his eyes gleaming. History is riddled with curses, Dr. Montague, just as it is riddled with greed, betrayal, and murder. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like an unseen shadow. Agatha sipped her wine thoughtfully, her mind already piecing together the dynamics at play: professional rivalries, strained alliances, and whispers of a cursed artifact. There was much to unravel, and the train had only just departed. Dinner continued, but the undercurrent of tension lingered. Agatha's gaze swept the room, noting the flickers of resentment in Montague's eyes, the calculating tilt of Sir Julian's head, and the barely contained glee on Harrington's face. The artifact might have been the centerpiece of Harrington's tale, but it was the people surrounding him who truly intrigued Agatha. As dessert was served, Harrington raised his glass. "Let us toast," he boomed, "to the triumphs of human discovery and the indomitable spirit of exploration." Crystal glasses clinked, and the tension in the room eased on the surface, at least. Agatha allowed herself a faint smile, though it was born of curiosity rather than amusement. The wheels of the Orient Express clattered on through the dusky Turkish countryside, carrying secrets and ambitions that promised to unravel before the journey's end. Leaning back in her chair, Agatha knew one thing for certain: she had come aboard, seeking answers about history, but it was clear she would find far more than she had anticipated. The game of intrigue had only just begun, and Agatha Marple was more than ready to play her part. Here's your expanded, dynamic version of the scene in an engaging, human-written style. Agatha's mind worked swiftly to connect the threads. She'd noted the pointed challenge in Madame Dubois' expression, the quiet agitation in Dr. Montague's poised features, and the detached amusement that danced in Sir Julian's eyes. Each subtle gesture and measured word hinted at histories and motives yet to be unveiled. As the train hurtled through the inky Turkish night, the dining car became a stage where shadows of greed, envy, and ambition loomed as darkly as the landscape beyond its windows. Madame Dubois, a striking woman with ruby-red lips and a penchant for expensive jewelry, tilted her head, her smile both gracious and sharp. "Indeed, Dr. Harrington, and yet I cannot help but wonder where exactly was this extraordinary find unearthed. It sounds almost too good to be true." A tense silence followed her words. Harrington's confident smile wavered but returned quickly, his chin lifting defiantly. "The site must remain undisclosed for now, Madame Dubois," he replied smoothly. "The academic world is rife with opportunists, as I'm sure you understand." "Of course," Dubois murmured, though her gaze remained unyielding. "And I imagine such an artifact would come with complications, questions of provenance perhaps." Beside Harrington, Dr. Evelyn Montague, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp features and a steady gaze, shifted uncomfortably. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the stem of her water glass. Agatha noted the movement, filing it away with quiet precision. Sir Julian Blake, seated on Harrington's other side, leaned back in his chair with an air of practiced joviality. His round face was wreathed in smiles, but his eyes gleamed with something far more calculating. "A fascinating tale, Dr. Harrington," Sir Julian drawled. "But tell me, have you brought this wonder aboard with you? It must be a sight to behold." Harrington's chest puffed with pride. "Indeed, Sir Julian, I would not dream of leaving such a treasure unattended. But I must warn you all," he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "This artifact comes with a history of misfortune. Some might even call it cursed. A ripple of nervous laughter traveled through the dining car. Madame Dubois leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with intrigue. Cursed, you say? How deliciously ominous. Agatha's sharp eyes caught the flicker of unease that crossed Montague's face. The scientist's lips thinned, and she tapped her fork against her plate with a controlled irritation. Superstition, Montague said briskly. Nothing more. Science deals in facts, not fairy tales. And yet, Harrington countered, his eyes gleaming. History is riddled with curses, Dr. Montague, just as it is riddled with greed, betrayal, and murder. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like an unseen shadow. Agatha sipped her wine thoughtfully, her mind already piecing together the dynamics at play: professional rivalries, strained alliances, and whispers of a cursed artifact. There was much to unravel, and the train had only just departed. Dinner continued, but the undercurrent of tension lingered. Agatha's gaze swept the room, noting the flickers of resentment in Montague's eyes, the calculating tilt of Sir Julian's head, and the barely contained glee on Harrington's face. The artifact might have been the centerpiece of Harrington's tale, but it was the people surrounding him who truly intrigued Agatha. As dessert was served, Harrington raised his glass. "Let us toast," he boomed, "to the triumphs of human discovery and the indomitable spirit of exploration." Crystal glasses clinked, and the tension in the room eased on the surface, at least. Agatha allowed herself a faint smile, though it was born of curiosity rather than amusement. The wheels of the Orient Express clattered on through the dusky Turkish countryside, carrying secrets and ambitions that promised to unravel before the journey's end. Leaning back in her chair, Agatha knew one thing for certain: she had come aboard seeking answers about history, but it was clear she would find far more than she had anticipated. The game of intrigue had only just begun, and Agatha Marple was more than ready to play her part. Agatha's mind worked swiftly to connect the threads. She'd noted the pointed challenge in Madame Dubois' expression, the quiet agitation in Dr. Montague's poised features, and the detached amusement that danced in Sir Julian's eyes. Each subtle gesture and measured word hinted at histories and motives yet to be unveiled. As the train hurtled through the inky Turkish night, the dining car became a stage where shadows of greed, envy, and ambition loomed as darkly as the landscape beyond its windows. The dining car of the Orient Express was a sanctuary of cultivated indulgence. Under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, laughter and refined conversation mingled with the clink of cutlery and the murmur of contented diners. Agatha sat near the rear of the car, her gaze quietly absorbing every detail. She savored each perfectly cooked morsel of her meal, yet her mind was anything but at ease. Every smile, every furtive glance, every tremor of unease was meticulously catalogued. She had boarded the train seeking historical answers, but it was quickly becoming evident that the night would offer far more secrets that demanded to be unraveled. The train's conductor and a swift-footed steward rushed in, closely followed by the ship's doctor, a composed man with silver hair. He knelt beside Harrington, his fingers moving methodically to check for signs of life. After a tense, excruciating moment, he straightened, his face grave as he announced, "He's dead." The simple words fell like a hammer, silencing the murmur of the gathered crowd. But as if the tragedy of Harrington's death were not enough, another revelation sent a ripple of unease through the room. A steward hurriedly whispered to the conductor, whose face tightened as he turned to address the shaken passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must ask for your patience," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "A search of Dr. Harrington's cabin has revealed that an artifact, a small relic of great value, is missing." A collective gasp swept through the dining car. Madame Dubois' eyes widened in shock as she exclaimed, "Stolen? Surely not." The conductor's tone was as grim as his expression. This artifact was of significant historical importance. His words, laced with foreboding, deepened the already tense atmosphere. Agatha noted how this news, Harrington's untimely death, paired with the missing relic, cast a dark shadow over the evening. Leaning back in her chair, she allowed her mind to piece together the first tentative threads of a larger puzzle. Clearing his throat to regain control, the conductor continued, I must also inform you all that the cabin doors were locked during dinner service. This is standard protocol to ensure passenger safety while our staff attends to the meal preparations." A murmur of confusion rippled around the room. Sir Julian Blake raised an eyebrow. "Locked cabins?" he questioned, his tone laced with skepticism. "That seems an unnecessary precaution." The conductor's response was measured and firm. "It is the train's policy. Even so, no one could have entered or exited Dr. Harrington's compartment during dinner, yet the artifact is missing." Madame Dubois, her voice sharp and tinged with disbelief, pressed, "How do you explain that?" It was then that Agatha's quiet, yet resolute voice broke through the escalating conversation. "The implication is clear, madam," she said, her tone both calm and commanding. "If the doors were indeed locked, then the theft and perhaps even the murder must have been committed by someone right here, within this very room." A heavy silence fell, as the weight of her words settled over the dining car. In that charged moment, every glance, every subtle gesture, took on a new significance. The laughter and chatter had long since faded, replaced by a collective realization. Beneath the polished veneer of civility, the true nature of human ambition and envy was at play. And as the train pressed onward into the night, Agatha Marple knew that the dark truths of the Orient Express were only beginning to reveal themselves. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances as the murmurs of shock and suspicion rippled through the dining car. Agatha's gaze drifted to the table where Dr. Harrington's body still lay, partially concealed beneath a hastily draped tablecloth. Her sharp eyes flickered from one face to another, noting every subtle shift in posture and every twitch of a hand. The train rocked gently as it sped through the night, its rhythmic clatter a constant reminder of the relentless journey ahead. In that charged moment, every passenger was bound together by threads of suspicion and fear. Calmly seated in the lounge haven of quiet sophistication, with its rich mahogany walls, plush velvet chairs, and the soft glow of lamplight, Agatha Marple allowed herself a moment of reprieve. Here, away from the chaos of the dining car, the atmosphere felt almost intimate, a fragile sanctuary from the storm of mistrust that had enveloped the Orient Express. Nestled by a window with knitting needles clicking softly in her hands, she watched the passing scenery as if it were a silent witness to the dark unraveling of events. To her, the truth lay not in the overt tragedy of Harrington's demise, but in the tangled web of human motives swirling around him. Her first stop was Dr. Evelyn Montague, who occupied a quiet corner of the lounge. Seated in a well-worn armchair and leafing through a battered book, the younger woman's sharp features and brisk, measured movements belied a storm of emotions beneath her calm exterior. Approaching with her trademark gentle curiosity, Agatha lowered herself into the chair opposite her. "Such a terrible business," Agatha murmured softly. "I hope I'm not intruding, Dr. Montague." Startled at first, Dr. Montague quickly composed herself. "Not at all, Miss Marple. It's unfortunate, of course. Dr. Harrington was never a man to inspire warm feelings." Her tone was clipped, and as she spoke, it was evident that the word colleague was not one she used lightly. Agatha arched an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Oh, I had assumed you were colleagues." Montague's lips thinned. "We were, but in academia respect is often the currency of convenience." Harrington had a knack for appropriating the work of others as if it were his own, a habit that earned him more than his fair share of enemies. The rhythmic clicking of Agatha's needles punctuated the silence as she absorbed the confession. "Enemies indeed," she murmured thoughtfully. "I do hope your work didn't suffer too greatly under his shadow." Dr. Montague's silence, as heavy as any spoken word, spoke volumes. Leaving Montague's company, Agatha moved next to the bar area where Sir Julian Blake was seated. Once the picture of affable charm, his demeanor had shifted to something more somber. Nursing a glass of brandy, he turned it slowly in his hand, as if contemplating every reflection of its amber hue. Agatha eased onto the stool beside him, her presence as unobtrusive as a whisper. "Quite the tragedy, isn't it?" she said in a conversational tone. "Dr. Harrington, such a prominent figure. I imagine working with him was no easy feat." Julian offered a soft, rueful chuckle. "That puts it mildly, Miss Marple. Harrington was a genius, no doubt, but he possessed the financial acumen of a child, always biting off more than he could chew. It's a wonder he managed to keep his head above water for as long as he did." Agatha's tone lightened with a touch of irony. "And you were his financial backer, were you not?" A wry smile played on Julian's lips, tinged with a hint of guilt. "Guilty is charged, indeed, though, to be fair, it was less of a backing and more of a recurring bailout. Harrington's debts ran deep, very deep." Before Agatha could probe further, her attention was drawn to another corner of the lounge. Madame Dubois, the picture of elegance in the most luxurious chair, sat with a cigarette holder delicately cradled in gloved fingers. Her gaze, though momentarily lost in the passing scenery, lit up with a gracious smile as Agatha approached. Taking the seat beside her, Agatha's voice was gentle yet direct. "Madame Dubois, what do I owe the pleasure?" Dubois' smile was smooth, yet her eyes carried a cool calculation. "Oh, Miss Marple, I wouldn't call it pleasure. Dr. Harrington's untimely demise weighs heavily on us all. I sought distraction in conversation, if nothing else." Agatha's curiosity was piqued. "And what of his dealings? I've heard whispers that his ambitions stretched beyond the confines of academia." A subtle shift crossed Madame Dubois' expression, a mixture of disdain and reluctant acknowledgement. Harrington's ambitions were indeed far-reaching. He had a taste for the exotic, particularly artifacts of questionable provenance. In certain circles, it's no secret he dabbled in the black market to acquire them. Agatha's needles stilled mid-click as she pressed. "Surely not." Dubois' smile sharpened. "Oh, indeed so. The artifact in his possession, what some have dubbed the cursed idol, was a prize beyond mere historical value. But it was not merely a matter of coin. He may have paid a much steeper price." A thoughtful pause followed, as Agatha's expression grew pensive. A man with secrets, debts, and enemies. No wonder he seemed larger than life. In the hushed ambiance of the lounge, the gravity of the situation settled over the trio. Each conversation, every shared memory and whispered rumor, painted a portrait of a man whose brilliance was matched only by his recklessness. And as the wheels of the Orient Express carried them deeper into the night, Agatha Marple was determined to unravel the intricate tapestry of ambition, betrayal, and mystery that had sealed Dr. Harrington's fate. "Larger than life, perhaps," Madame Dubois remarked, stubbing out her cigarette with a final, deliberate motion. "But like all men, mortal in the end." As the train sped toward its next destination, Agatha Marple sat alone, her knitting needles clicking in time with her restless thoughts. Around her, the echoes of Dr. Montague's resentment, Sir Julian Blake's financial grievances, and Madame Dubois' intimate knowledge of the black market wove a tapestry of motives. Every thread pulled the picture tighter, and Agatha knew that somewhere in that intricate web lay the truth if only she could unravel it. The train rumbled steadily through the Anatolian countryside, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon that streamed through the observation car's expansive windows. Agatha sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, listening intently as Dr. Evelyn Montague, who had reluctantly agreed to discuss the artifact, spoke in clipped yet precise tones. "It's called the Idol of Kadesh," Montague said, her eyes narrowing as she recalled the details. "A small carved figure, no more than 6 inches tall. Dr. Harrington claimed it was recovered from a temple site in Syria. But—" her voice faltered, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "There's no way to verify that claim." Agatha's keen eyes caught the fleeting bitterness in Montague's expression. "You doubt its authenticity," she prompted gently. Montague exhaled sharply. Harrington was more showman than scholar. He knew how to captivate an audience, but his methods were dubious. The idol's provenance is suspect, to say the least. And then there's the matter of the so-called curse. "A curse?" Agatha echoed, her voice soft yet laced with curiosity. Montague waved a dismissive hand. "Superstitious nonsense, really. They say the idol brings misfortune to anyone who possesses it. Harrington loved to embellish his tales. It made his discoveries more marketable. But you don't believe in curses, do you?" "Of course not," Montague replied firmly. But curses do have a way of attracting trouble, especially when artifacts like the idol fall into the wrong hands. Collectors, dealers, even criminals, it's a sordid business. Agatha nodded, her mind already racing. Harrington's penchant for spectacle and his dubious methods painted a portrait of a man who thrived on drama. Yet beneath the glitter of his public persona lurked a darker truthone of greed, deceit, and perhaps something far more sinister. "Thank you, Dr. Montague," Agatha said with a faint smile. "You've been most helpful." After Montague returned to her cabin, Agatha remained in the observation car, her thoughts circling the idol like a hungry bird of prey. A cursed artifact, a murder, and a missing relicit was a puzzle with too many missing pieces. But one detail stood out like a beacon. If Harrington had possessed the idol, where was it now? And had it ever been genuine? With that thought in mind, Agatha made her way to the corridor outside Sir Julian Blake's cabin. The passage was quiet, the only sound the steady hum of the train's engine. She paused before the door, her gloved hand resting lightly on the brass handle. Julian had excused himself earlier, complaining of a headache, and Agatha suspected he might not return anytime soon. This was an opportunity too good to ignore. The cabin, modestly furnished yet elegant in its simplicity, bore the unmistakable mark of a man of Sir Julian's stature. Agatha moved with practiced discretion, her sharp eye scanning every inch of the room for anything amiss. It didn't take long to find something unusual, tucked inside the drawer of the writing desk, a small glass vial, its stopper conspicuously missing. Holding the vial up to the light, Agatha's brows knitted in thought. A faint residue clung to the bottom, suggesting that it had once contained a liquid poison. Her pulse quickened for a moment, though she forced herself to remain calm. This discovery was significant, yet something about it felt staged. The vial had been too easily found, its placement almost deliberate. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she set the vial back in the drawer, her mind churning with questions. Why leave such incriminating evidence in plain sight? Sir Julian was a man of considerable intelligence. He wouldn't be so careless unless, of course, he intended for someone to find it. A faint creak behind her sent a chill down her spine. Agatha turned swiftly to find Madame Dubois standing in the doorway, her expression a blend of amused curiosity and knowing mischief. "Miss Marple," Madame Dubois said smoothly, stepping inside. "I didn't take you for the snooping type." Agatha offered a polite smile, though her mind raced to formulate a response. "Curiosity is a habit of mine, madam." "That's true," Dubois replied, her eyes drifting toward the writing desk. "Did your curiosity yield anything of interest?" "Not yet," Agatha replied evenly. "But one never knows where a clue might appear." Dubois' lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Be careful, Miss Marple. Curiosity can be dangerous." With that, Madame Dubois turned and swept out of the cabin, leaving Agatha alone with her thoughts. The vial of poison was a clue. Whether it was genuine evidence or a red herring remained to be seen. What was clear, however, was that the game was far from over. As the train barreled forward into the night, Agatha's mind churned with questions and possibilities, determined to peel back the layers of deceit and uncover the truth hidden within this tangled web of ambition and treachery. The last stop on the Orient line rattled steadily through the rugged mountains, the surrounding landscape shrouded in a soft, misty haze. Within the confines of the train's first-class lounge, Agatha Marple sat at a small table tucked away in a corner. To the casual observer, she appeared absorbed in her knitting, the gentle clack of her needles serving as a soothing counterpoint to the low, murmuring conversations filling the room. But Agatha wasn't knitting merely for leisure. Every stitch, every rhythmic tap, was underscored by her acute awareness. Her sharp ears caught every nuance of conversation between Madame Dubois and Sir Julian Blake. Their exchange was low, and charged. Madame Dubois' voice radiated cool control, while Sir Julian's clipped responses hinted at an unusual absence of his usual jovial air. Agatha was certain there was something significant behind their words. When Madame Dubois excused herself and drifted elegantly out of the lounge, Agatha rose with deliberate purpose. She quickly caught up to her near the corridor, where the soft glow of brass sconces illuminated Dubois' confident stride. Madame Dubois, Agatha began gently, I wonder if I might trouble you for a word. Madame Dubois paused, a subtle arch of her brow betraying her interest. Miss Marple, you do have a talent for finding me at the most curious times, she replied with a wry smile. Agatha's own smile was equally light, though underpinned by a steady determination. Curiosity is a habit of mine, she said. I'm afraid, though, that curiosity now demands more than idle musings. After a brief moment of consideration, Madame Dubois nodded. Very well. Shall we speak here, or would you prefer somewhere more private? The lounge will suffice, Agatha replied, gesturing for them to return to a quiet alcove of the room. Once seated, Agatha's tone softened to an unassuming warmth, the very quality that had disarmed many before her. Madame, I've been reflecting on Dr. Harrington's sudden death. Such an unfortunate loss, especially considering the artifact he was transporting. Madame Dubois' expression remained impassive, yet Agatha noticed her fingers tense ever so slightly against the edge of her chair. It is tragic, of course, Dubois said coolly, though if I may say so, his reputation was not entirely unblemished. Agatha inclined her head in agreement. I've heard whispers that he intended to sell the artifact once we reached Paris, a lucrative endeavor indeed. A faint smile played on Dubois' lips, though it never quite reached her eyes. The art world is rife with temptation, Miss Marple. I'm sure you understand that such rumors are common. I do understand, Agatha replied, her tone mild yet probing. But I also understand that you've had dealings with the collector Roland Vaser. His reputation, as you know, is rather colorful in certain circles. For a moment, Madame Dubois' composure faltered. Her gaze narrowed slightly, silent confirmation that Agatha was well informed. You are well informed indeed, Dubois acknowledged coolly. Agatha's smile deepened, a glimmer of triumph in her eyes. One must be when traveling in such esteemed company. Tell me, madam, do you think it possible that Dr. Harrington's death was less about rivalry or jealousy and more about securing his treasure for another buyer? Madame Dubois leaned back, her fingers coming to a deliberate, still rest. That depends entirely on who stood to benefit, she replied cryptically, her tone measured yet hinting at secrets untold. Agatha nodded slowly, satisfied that she had planted the seed of doubt. The conversation drifted to safer topics after that, but as they parted ways, the guarded look in Madame Dubois' eyes said everything that needed to be known. In that fleeting moment, Agatha sensed that the tangled web of motives, greed, betrayal, and hidden ambitions was far more intricate than anyone had dared to admit. And as the Orient Express continued its relentless journey through the mountains, Agatha Marple was more determined than ever to untangle the threads and expose the truth behind the murder, the missing relic, and the dark ambitions lurking within the hearts of its passengers. Madame Dubois was hiding something, and Agatha was closer than ever to uncovering what lay beneath the surface. Later that evening, Agatha found herself back in the dining car, seated across from Dr. Evelyn Montague. The two women spoke in hushed tones, their conversation blending with the soft hum of nearby diners and the gentle clatter of cutlery. I must ask for your assistance, Dr. Montague, Agatha said, her voice carrying an undercurrent of urgency. Did you by chance take any photographs of the artifact before Dr. Harrington's death? Montague blinked in surprise before replying, Yes, I died as part of the documentation process. Agatha leaned forward, her eyes intent. Would it be possible to see them? There was a moment of hesitation as Montague's wary gaze met Agatha's steady, resolute expression. Something in Agatha's calm assurance must have eased her doubts, for she nodded slowly. I have them in my cabin. Wait here, she murmured before departing. Moments later, Montague returned clutching a small leather-bound notebook. Inside were several meticulously annotated photographs. Agatha studied each image with intense focus. She noted every detail of the idol, the intricate carvings, the subtle weathering, and a distinct mark at its base that spoke of craftsmanship and time. Fascinating, Agatha murmured softly. Then, with measured precision, she reached into her handbag and produced a folded handkerchief. Unfolding it with deliberate care, she revealed a small figurine idol, recovered from Harrington's cabin. Placing it beside the photographs, she leaned in, her voice quiet yet firm. "This is not the same artifact," Agatha stated. "Are you certain?" Montague's breath hitched in response. "Quite," Agatha replied, leaving no room for doubt. "The markings are different, the details less precise. This is a replica, poor one, if I may say so, which means the real artifact is missing." A heavy silence settled between them as the implications sank in. "And likely the key to this entire mystery," Agatha finished, her tone both resolute and tinged with a hint of sorrow. The train rocked gently as it continued its journey, the rhythmic clatter of its wheels underscoring the gravity of Agatha's discovery. The idle switch was no accident. It was deliberate, calculated, and undoubtedly connected to Dr. Harrington's death. Somewhere on the last stop on the Orient line, those responsible had taken great pains to cover their tracks, but they had not counted on Agatha Marple. Determined to press on, Agatha rose from her seat. The sound of the train's wheels served as a constant reminder of the relentless march of time as she made her way toward the luggage car. Her footsteps were soft against the thick carpet, each step heavy with the weight of her newfound discovery. Every measured stride brought her closer to a truth she suspected would come at a perilous cost. As she entered the dimly lit luggage car, the air shifted. The faint scent of polished wood and leather mingled with the metallic tang of cold steel. Stacks of trunks and suitcases lined the narrow corridor, casting long, eerie shadows beneath a solitary overhead lamp. Agatha paused, her sharp eyes scanning the space for any sign of movement. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, faintest suggestion of another presence made her heart quicken, though her expression remained unflinching. With cautious determination, Agatha stepped forward. Her gloved hand brushed lightly against the edge of a nearby trunk, each contact a silent testament to her resolve. The discovery of the counterfeit idol had opened a door to a labyrinth of secrets, and now, in the hushed darkness of the luggage car, Agatha Marple felt the pull of destiny. Every creak of the train and every murmur in the shadows seemed to whisper a warning. The truth was near, but it would not be revealed without a cost. And so, with her mind alert and her senses honed, Agatha pressed on into the uncertain night, ready to uncover the next piece of a puzzle that promised both peril and revelation. The sound came from over the trunk, a faint footfall echoing through the dim light. "Who's there?" Agatha called out, her voice steady but edged with authority. For a long, heart-stopping moment, only the relentless hum of the speeding train filled the silence. Then, with a creak that sliced through the quiet, a door swung shut. The single overhead lamp flickered and dimmed, plunging the luggage car into a labyrinth of shifting shadows. Agatha spun around, her mind racing. Whoever was in there intended to trap her. The heavy door to the corridor had been pulled shut, its lock clicking decisively, a sound that resonated like a mocking punctuation in the darkness. "Ah," she murmured, a trace of dry amusement coloring her tone despite the danger. "How thoughtful." Moving cautiously, Agatha edged deeper into the car, every sense heightened. The chill of the night seeped through the thin walls of the train, and she could almost hear the whispered rustle of fabric to her left, a sound that hinted at movement, at someone waiting, perhaps hoping she would panic and become an easy target. But Agatha Marple was not one to yield to fear. Her gloved hand brushed lightly against the edge of a nearby trunk. In one swift motion, she yanked it open, the sudden noise reverberating off the walls. In response, a figure darted from the shadows, their movement sharp and deliberate. In the brief flare of light, Agatha caught sight of an outline, a figure cloaked in dark fabric, their face hidden beneath the brim of a hat. The intruder lunged toward her, but Agatha anticipated the attack. With surprising agility for her small frame, she sidestepped just in time. The assailant's momentum carried them forward, colliding with a towering stack of luggage. The crash of falling trunks and clattering suitcases filled the air, momentarily muffling Agatha's hurried retreat. She fumbled briefly with the lock on the door, her fingers trembling with adrenaline before she twisted it open. The door creaked as it swung inward, and a thin beam of light from the corridor spilled in. Without hesitation, Agatha slipped through, slamming the door shut behind her and securing it with a definitive click. Just then, a steward rounded the corner. "Miss Marple, are you quite all right?" he exclaimed, concern lacing his voice. Straightening her hat and smoothing her features into a mask of composure, Agatha replied, "Quite, thank you. But I suggest you alert the conductor there is someone in the luggage car who shouldn't be there." The steward's face paled at her words, and he hurried off to carry out her instructions. Agatha lingered in the corridor for a moment, her mind piecing together the implications of what had just transpired. The attempt on her life confirmed one thing: her relentless pursuit of the truth was closing in on someone dangerous. A faint, wry smile tugged at her lips as she adjusted her gloves and began to walk back toward her compartment. The game had taken a perilous turn, but Agatha Marple had no intention of backing down. If anything, her resolve had only strengthened. The shadows on this train were deep, but she was determined to drag every one of them into the light. Later, in the dining car, uncharacteristically hushed, the usual hum of conversation had given way to a thick, tense silence. Passengers sat rigidly in their chairs, eyes darting anxiously toward the far end of the room where the conductor stood, flanked by Dr. Evelyn Montague. Montague's face was pale, yet her posture was resolute as she held her head high, a stark contrast to the murmured accusations swirling around her. "I regret this, Dr. Montague," the conductor began gravely, holding up a small glass container. "But the evidence is compelling. This vial was found in your medical kit." A faint residue clung to the bottom of the vial, the kind of residue that ignited suspicion. Montague's voice was firm as she replied, "I do not deny it's mine, but it is standard for a physician to carry such items. That does not make me a murderer." A low murmur rippled through the gathered passengers, a blend of curiosity and suspicion. From a seat near the back of the car, Agatha's eyes narrowed as she observed the unfolding scene. Her knitting needles, once tapping away in steady rhythm, had fallen silent. For the first time that evening, she decided to speak up. "Compelling evidence, perhaps," Agatha declared, her voice cutting cleanly through the tense air. All eyes turned toward her as she rose from her seat. Her demeanor was calm, yet commanding as she stepped forward. "Tell me, Mr. Conductor, was this vial discovered in plain view?" The conductor hesitated, then replied, "It was found during a routine check of Dr. Montague's belongings." Agatha's tone sharpened. "And yet, if I were inclined to commit such a crime, I would not leave such an incriminating item in my own possession, let alone where it could be so easily discovered." Her gaze swept the room, noting how Montague's eyes flickered with a mix of relief and gratitude, while the murmurs among the passengers shifted, suspicion now tinged with doubt. The conductor, visibly unsettled, cleared his throat. "The matter is serious, Miss Marple. It is not merely conjecture." "Precisely why conjecture should not lead to a hasty conclusion," Agatha replied smoothly. "If we truly wish to solve this crime, we must look beyond the surface." The polished glass of the observation car reflected not just the flickering lanterns, but also the determined glint in Agatha's eyes, a silent promise that no matter how deep the shadows ran on the Orient Express, she would bring every one of them into the light. Agatha replaced the items carefully, her mind racing as she exited Madame Dubois' cabin. There was no doubt now Dubois was at the very heart of this tangled web. But her next move would be critical. For all her cunning, Dubois had underestimated one thing: the resolve of Agatha Marple. In the Grand Salon car of the last stop on the Orient line, opulence reigned supreme. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over velvet upholstery and polished brass railings that gleamed even amidst the undercurrent of tension. Passengers sat in hushed anticipation, their faces etched with anxiety in the golden light. At the center of the room stood Agatha, her diminutive frame framed by the grand windows that revealed a blur of moonlit hills speeding past. She adjusted her gloves with quiet precision, her eyes sweeping the room before she began. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice calm yet commanding, "we find ourselves nearing the conclusion of a most unfortunate affair. The murder of Dr. Harrington, while tragedies not without logic or purpose. Tonight, I intend to lay bare the truth." A murmur rippled through the room. Madame Dubois sat poised at a table, her gloved hands folded elegantly in her lap, her expression one of mild curiosity. Sir Julian Blake fidgeted with his cufflinks, and Dr. Montague's steely gaze betrayed a mix of relief and weariness. "The key to this mystery," Agatha continued, "is the artifact Dr. Harrington so proudly displayed, or rather, what he claimed to display." She paused, letting her words sink in. "For as I discovered, the idol found in his cabin was a forgery, a fact that holds far greater significance than I initially realized." Her words cut through the silence like a knife. "A forgery," someone murmured, and Agatha pressed on. "This was no accident. It was part of a calculated plan to divert suspicion and facilitate a far more lucrative scheme." At this, Madame Dubois' smile faltered. Her knuckles tightened against the edge of her chair. Agatha took a step forward, her sharp gaze locking onto Dubois. "From the beginning, the so-called cursed idol was nothing more than a smokescreen, a tale designed to instill fear and mislead the curious. And who better to exploit such superstition than you, Madame Dubois?" The room collectively held its breath. For a fraction of a second, Dubois' composure cracked, but she recovered swiftly. "Miss Marple," she said with a cool laugh, "I'm afraid your imagination has run away with you. What possible motive could I have?" Agatha's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "You had every motive. Dr. Harrington's history of acquiring and selling artifacts of questionable provenance is well known. But you saw an opportunity to turn his habit to your advantage. Before the journey even began, the genuine, priceless artifact was switched with a forgery. The real idol was destined for delivery to a certain Roland Vaser in Paris. Your hidden correspondence, the vial of poison planted in Dr. Montague's kit, and the forgery itself all reveal the plan quite clearly." Dubois' expression hardened, but she said nothing more. Agatha pressed on, her tone steady and inexorable. "And as for Dr. Harrington's murder, his boastful proclamations made him vulnerable. A carefully concealed poison, identical to the one found in Dr. Montague's kit, was used to silence him during dinner. The locked doors of the train provided the perfect opportunity to shift suspicion onto another, a colleague with motive to resent him." Dr. Montague exhaled sharply, her tense shoulders relaxing for the first time that evening. Finally, Agatha concluded, the relic's supposed curse provided the perfect cover. Who would suspect that such meticulous, calculated greed could be hidden behind the veil of superstition? As if on cue, the train slowed, approaching its next stop, a quiet station bathed in flickering gaslight. Madame Dubois' face turned pale, but remained composed as the train's conductor and a pair of uniformed officers entered the salon car. "You have no proof," Dubois snapped, her voice icy. "On the contrary," Agatha replied, her tone laced with quiet triumph. "Your letters to Roland Vaser, the hidden vial of poison, and the forgery itself are proof enough. Justice does not require a confession, only evidence." The officers stepped forward and escorted Madame Dubois from the room, leaving the remaining passengers in stunned silence. Agatha returned to her seat, where her knitting lay waiting. The familiar clack of her needles resumed, a steady counterpoint to the fading tension, as the train rattled on into the night. Soon, Sir Julian Blake approached her, his expression a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Miss Marple, how did you piece it all together?" With a faint smile, and that ever-reliable habit of noticing what others overlook, Agatha replied, "Observation, Sir Julian. Greed and ambition have a way of revealing themselves, even when one tries to hide them." As the train neared Paris, Agatha gazed out at the city's approaching lights. The ordeal had ended, but the lessons it carried would linger. The human heart, she mused, was capable of both brilliance and folly, and it was her task to untangle the two. With one final glance at the remaining passengers, each now carrying their own hidden truths, Agatha resumed her knitting. The train continued its journey, leaving behind a trail of secrets, lies, and justice served. "Thank you for sticking with me until the very end of this story." Agatha's voice echoed in her mind, a quiet farewell to the shadows of the Orient line. "Your support means everything." And as she looked forward to her next case, she mused that the impossible adventures of the masked monster were far from over. Stay curious and keep an eye on the shadows. You never know what secrets they may reveal.